Today's daf we're going to be learning today is Yevamot Daf Nun Hey. Chodesh Tov, Shabbat Tov to everyone. Despite the difficult news over the weekend in Israel. Today's daf is sponsored by Rachel Chayfetz or Rochelle Chayfetz in honor of her mother, Chana Cohen, Chana Bat Rav Moshe and Sipora Mashbaum on her first year at Set. It is still hard to believe that my wonderful and beautiful mother is no longer here to fill her role as matron of our extended family. She dedicated herself to family in Israel. Her beautiful and warm smile, exuberance, and guidance are strongly missed. Today's daf is sponsored also by Adi Levi Eitan for Fuash Lema for Chana Sarah Bat Esther. Okay, we're going to get started with our daf. We have a bit of a graphic daf. If it hasn't been graphic until now, it's going to get a little worse. And if you are learning and thinking, oh, this doesn't sound too bad, at the end, it will get even worse. So I'm giving you fair warning. I would maybe even start, although I have to say, I don't really have a good answer to this question, but it's hard to not address it, which is why are the rabbis going into such graphic detail into all these things? The only possible answer I could offer is that, again, this is a legal document and they're trying to get, like the rabbis didn't think any topic was taboo. And the idea is to get into, if you talk about arayot, okay, this is our main topic, forbidden relations, which whether you're abroad or you're in Israel, you've already gotten into them in the Parsha, right? If you're in Israel, you've already kind of finished them. And a lot of the things from Kedoshim, this week's Parsha in Israel, are in today's daf, as well as parts of Acharemot. I hope that you enjoyed the Parsha over Shabbat, just kind of thinking, oh, wow, we've been dealing with all this. And here it is inside. In fact, I'll share with you one thing that I thought of when I was in shul yesterday that kind of jumped out at me as we were learning it, but I'll get to that in a minute. But you really need to define what is considered a sexual act, because if you don't define it to the last detail, you won't know. Now, again, how they know, witnesses, how you know what exactly transpired is another question entirely. But they viewed it as a legal discussion as they get into all sorts of details of any other legal topic to, crazy detail often, because they're trying to analyze the legals of it. So I guess they're doing the same thing here, especially when you're talking about karet and you're talking about very serious offenses. You have to know, especially if it's karet, it's by God. So nobody needs to know. But for your own sake to know, did I do something wrong or not? So in any case, that's maybe a reason, an explanation to offer. I don't have a really good explanation other than that. It is quite complicated and quite difficult. And if you are a young listener, it's going to be even more complicated to be learning this kind of thing and thinking, why are the rabbis discussing this? As I said, I don't have a great question, but I did want to at least put it out there as this is really a good question to ask. And again, if you look from a purely legalistic perspective, you can sort of see it, but it's still quite complicated. One thing I wanted to point out that I noticed very blatantly when I was reading the Parsha yesterday is that we had this drasha in yesterday's daf from the pasuk of Ervat achot avicha ve'achot imecha lo tigale. And Rashi explained there, and as what's unique about that pasuk that they then darshan from it. What's unique about that verse is that Rashi says it should have said ki ish ki kach achot aviv achot imo avonam yisal. And the fact that it worded in the language of Ervat achot avicha ve'achot imecha was strange. Now, if you were reading Parshat Acharemot this week, then, or even if you saw it last week, you'll say, well, that's a little bit, that's like the typical language. But if you're reading Parshat Kedoshim, I looked and all the cases start with ishki ishkav, ishki yikav, ishki, right? It's all a man who sleeps with a woman like this. And every single verse other than that one starts off with some sort of verb relating to the man. If he does this, they will get punished. And in this case, it started with a general, which really sounded more like it would belong in chapter 18, which is Ervat achot avicha v'achot imcha lo tigale, right? Don't reveal the erva of blank, blank, blank. So it really is a very strange pasuk that stands out very clearly, which I didn't realize, because when I looked at it before I taught, I glanced at it, but I didn't read the entire chapter. And when you read the whole chapter, you really see it, and you can understand why the rabbi said there's clearly something going on here. So if you didn't notice it, or Parshat Kedoshim is coming up for you next week, pay attention to it then. Okay, now we're going to start with our daf. We ended with this interesting case that, again, highly unlikely, but theoretical case where a man ends up married to a woman. He hears that she dies. He then marries her sister through her. I don't remember which was first and which was second, but through her mother. Then he thinks she dies. He marries her sister through her father. Then he thinks she dies. He marries the sister through the mother. He thinks she dies, right? And then we end up with this case where we have these 5 women he married each is sister to two of them, one or two of them. And in the end, he finds out that they're all alive, or maybe one died, the rest are alive. And then who is he actually married to and who is he not? Which Kiddushin were not Tofsim because they were Arayot of the sister. Now, the main point they want to get out of this, I accidentally said yesterday because it started with a Bahata Tnan, and I accidentally said it was a question. It's not a question. They bring up, and the fact that this is a Mishnah, therefore, we can infer from here that the sister of his wife is going to be forbidden, whether it's from the mother, whether it's from the father. And that is clear from the story, because here he married the sister of his wife on the father's side, and from the mother's side, he kept marrying, right, every other one. So from here, it's clear that your wife's sister is going to be forbidden to you. I can't remember if I said it the wrong way. Sometimes confuse these terms while I'm teaching. His wife's sister is forbidden to you either way, whether she's your wife's sister because they share the same father, or whether there's a wife's sister because you share the same mother. And by the way, I noticed right now that Gita said something I forgot to say that I wanted to say, which is the famous quote going back to our original discussion, Torahi Olam Dal Nitzarich, right? When the rabbi hid under his rabbi's bed, right? And he said, this is Torah and I need to learn everything, right? And maybe that's another good explanation. Again, it doesn't totally, right? But you have to know what's forbidden and what's not. Again, it's not to say you should do anything less than what's forbidden and that's okay, right? We'll get into some graphic details today of what, maybe you're not going to get punished for, but might not be the right thing to do either, but still you need to know where exactly the boundaries are. Okay. So now they want to know Minalan. Our first question for today is going to be, where do we learn that? Right, it's clear from that Mishnah, but the question is, where is it derived from the Torah that your wife's sister is going to be forbidden to you, whether they're sisters through the mother only or the sisters through the father only? Yalef me'achoto. Now, the pasuk about your sister, again, this is your wife's sister. So why don't we learn your wife's sister from your own sister? Your own sister, it says in the Torah, achoto mena'av and achoto mena'im, right? Your sister from both sides, either side. So ma'achoto be'mena'av be'mena'im, that's explicit in the Torah. Let's learn from here to your wife's sister. Afkan be'mena'av be'mena'im. Then the Gemara says, well, if you're going to learn it from sister, we could also learn it from leilaf midodato, from your aunt, which is basically your brother, your father's or your mother's brother's wife. That's not so far off from your own wife's sister, right? So kind of similar. Again, it's not exactly similar, but we'll see in a minute why they think it's similar. Now, ma dodato mena'av v'lo mena'im. Now, dodato means your mother's brother's wife or your father's brother's wife. Now, both of those, now you have to get what's be'em and ab be'em na'im. It is from your mother and your father. But question is, how is your mother and her brother related? And how is your father and his brother related? They have to be related. Again, this goes way back. We learned this. We learned it not so long ago, but we learned it way back. And earlier in Yevamot about that woman is only forbidden if they share the same father. In other words, again, you're meaning the third generation up, right? Not your generation, not the generation above, but the generation above that was your father and his brother are connected through the father, and your mother and her brother are connected through your father, then his wife will be forbidden. But if they only share the same mother, it's not forbidden. So why don't we learn it from the aunt case? So now they're going to say, well, mistabra. So why don't we learn there? Just like that's been aim and not through the mother. Afkan, maybe here also. Your wife's sister, only if it's your sister from mina'av v'lo mina'em. So mistabra me'achoto avalei l'melech. Better learn it from your sister. Why? Shekain krovei atzmo mi krovei atzmo. Because your relative is your sister. That's your relative. And why you're forbidden to your wife's sister? Through yourself. You married your wife. Because of you, you're forbidden to her sister. That's different from your father's relatives or your mother's relatives, right? That's your father's sister-in-law or your mother's sister-in-law. That's not through you. That's through your parents. So better to learn that. So then they say, Adrabah, no, I can convince you otherwise. You should learn from your aunt. Why? What's similar to your aunt? She's married to your uncle. What's the story with your wife's sister? It's through marriage. They're both through marriage as opposed to your sister, who's your blood relative. So you can see making a distinction there. You should have learned it from there. Right? Something through marriage. We learn from something through marriage. So we basically reject both. We try to learn from achoto. What's the ideal? Achoto, it's clear in the Torah, and dodato, it's clear from the Torah. So, right, one includes both, and one is only from the father. So once we say that, why don't we assume, right? The problem is we can't learn from either one because each one has a similarity and a difference to our case. So in the end, they say, well, let's learn it from your brother's wife. Okay, this is the Yibum case, right? It's not generally allowed, only because of Yibum it's allowed. But forget about Yibum for right now. Your brother's wife is always forbidden to you. Even when your brother dies, she's forbidden. Now, that we're going to assume is your brother's wife, whether it's through the father, whether it's through the mother. Now, we don't yet know why that is. It doesn't appear explicitly in the Torah, which is why it wasn't brought as our first option. But why is this the best option? Because Shekain Davar Yidei Kiddushin Ukrovei Atzmo. It's both related through you. It's your brother's wife, not your father's brother's wife. And it's also through marriage. It's your brother's wife who he married. It's not your blood relative. So this is a perfect case. What's the problem? We don't know where we know that Eshet Ach is whether it's your brother through your mother or your brother through your father. And in fact, if we think about Yibum, remember, Yibum's only through the father. Later, we're going to get back to that. And once we prove it's through the mother and through the father, they're going to say to them, why don't we learn from here that Yibum, which comes from the Isur Eshet Ach, but yet, right, it undoes the Isur of Eshet Ach. Why is Yibum only through the father? Maybe we should learn from here that Yibum's from the mother also. But we'll get to that later. This is actually a bit of a long section. So Eshet Ach Gufa Minala. Now we're going to have a very similar structure to what we just had a minute ago, which is they're going to try to learn it from the sister case and try to learn it from the aunt case. And in the end, they're not going to be able to learn it from either one because, again, it's going to be similar to each one in one way and different from it in another way. So the same way as we just said a minute ago with his wife's sister. Eshet Ach Gufa Minala. And so where are we going to learn this from? Titania. Okay, here's a classic Midrash Halacha. It's going to start off and say we learn it from this verse. And then it's going to start suggesting, it's going to say, and this is the halacha, and this is where we derive it from, but then it's going to explain how we got to that derivation and why we didn't say otherwise. So, ervat esh dachicha lo tegale, and the real part that they're going to darshan is not that part of the verse. Okay, this is in Vayikra Yudchen in Parshat Achraymo, Pasuk Tet Zayin 16. Ervat esh dachicha lo tegale, ervat achicha hi. They're going to darshan it from the second part. It says, don't reveal the erva of your brother's wife, because it's the erva of your brother. Now, you didn't need to say because it's the erva of your brother. That's clear, right? Because it's your brother's wife. Of course, that's why you don't need the second part. The second part is extra. Therefore, it comes to teach you beimena av, beimena ein. Okay, that's again the topic sentence here of the Midrash Halacha. Now we're going to throw that up in the air and say, who says? Maybe not. So now they say, ata omel beimena av, beimena ein. That's what you say, but we know and maybe it's only through the father and not the mother. Bidinu, and I can tell you logically why that should be. And he made you liable here, and he made you liable for your sister. Right, which would be logical. Learn your sister from your brother's wife, right? They're both related to you through your siblings. Makes sense. So there, since it's both. Or maybe or maybe I could tell you the alternative option, which is he made you liable here and he made you liable for your aunt. Just like the aunt is only through the father. So, right, they're just kind of throwing out both possibilities, and now they're going to go even more in depth into each possibility. What's it more similar to? Well, on the one hand, you could say your own relatives through your brother's wife or your sister, right? Those are both your own relatives because of you. Not your aunt, which is related to you through your father, right? It's more your father's relative. Or alternatively, you could say the same thing. This is just a repeat of what we did previously with Achot Ishto. Or maybe say the opposite. Something through marriage. Your brother's wife is related to you through marriage only, and your aunt is related to you through marriage only. So why don't we learn from your aunt? It's your brother's wife. That's something you're born into. That's your blood relative. So because it could go this way and it could go that way, Talmud Lamar, okay, before we go on, I'm going to just summarize what we did so far in today's stuff so you don't get confused because it's a little confusing, but it's actually very clear cut. We started with Achot Ishto. How do you know it's beimena av, beimena ein, which we already proved in the Mishnah yesterday that's clear. It's just where does it come from? So they tried to learn from, right, the two clear cases in the Torah, Achoto and Dodato. In the end, Each one has a similarity and a difference to it. So we can't learn it from either one. We're going to learn it from Eshet Ach. Then they say Eshet Ach, where do we learn it from? So then they said, right, because it's not clear in the Torah. And then they said, we're going to learn it from this extra part in the verse. And then they said, well, if you want to try to learn it either from Achoto or Dodato, you're going to have the exact same problem that we just had previously, which is it's right, either it's his own relatives or it's through marriage, right? And none of them have both things going for them. So each one could be a possibility. That's why we can't decide between the two. And that's why we need a special drasha. The next part is going to be, well, it's true, I'll accept that Ervat Achicha Hi are extra words in the verse, but who's to say that it's teaching us Be'emin Ha'av, Be'emin Ha'em, right? That even if it's from your mother's side, maybe it's teaching you something else. And that's going to be a few suggestions here. Maybe you will learn something else from there. And each time we're going to say, no, that is learned from somewhere else. And therefore we don't need this pasuk for it. In the end, we're going to be left, this pasuk is unnecessary. We're going to use it to learn both from the mother and from the father. And then we can go back and learn from there to the case of your sister's wife, your wife's sister, because it's also, right, they both have two similarities. They're both through marriage and they're both your relative, right? Either your wife or your brother, okay? Something that's your relative and rather than your father's generation. So now, why don't you say both, right? Both are referring to your brother through your father, and that really you're not forbidden to your brother's wife through your mother. Again, this is just throwing it up in the air and suggesting. What else would we need that verse for? One is where she got divorced from your brother and she has children. And one is she got divorced from her brother and she doesn't have children. Now, since, right, you might say like this, since Yibam allows you to marry your brother's wife in the event that they didn't have children, maybe you would think that even if he's still alive and he divorced her and didn't have children, maybe you'd be allowed to marry her. So that's why you need Ervat Achicha Hi to teach you both cases are going to be forbidden. And then it's not free to teach what we wanted it to teach, which was even from the mother. And then we're only talking about through the father, or your brother through your father, his wife, if you're still alive, if he's still alive, he divorced her. You can't marry her, whether he had children or whether he didn't have children. And that's what the two parts of the verse teach you. So now they say no. Because we just learned on yesterday's daf that Rav Huna learns it from, okay, if you don't remember, Rashi helps you out here. Mida Rav Huna, it's like the seventh Rashi on the page. You have to go way up the page from Rashi. Remember on Amabet, we said, what is the word nida coming for? If it's not coming for what we thought it was coming to teach us about the ha'ara'ah, then it's coming to teach you, esh tachiv nidahi, that just like the nida, even though she'll be permitted to you down the road, she's forbidden now and it's kareh. Likewise, your brother's wife, which will be forbidden down the road if he dies without children. So if he divorced her now without children, even though theoretically it could have been permitted to you, right, if he had died without children, but now it's going to be forbidden to you as well. So, right, it's forbidden b'chayei ba'ala. That's what we learned. When her husband's still alive, your brother, there's no way you can ever marry her. So that we learned from somewhere else. You don't need this verse for. Second option, maybe they're both talking about a case of Eshet Ach Min Ha'av. Again, that's just saying it doesn't include from the mother. One is she has children when he's alive, and right, meaning he divorced her and they have children, you can't marry her. And one is he has children and he dies. And maybe you would think that you can marry her. Comes the pasuk to teach you, you can't marry your brother's wife if he died with children. Now, you might say, and we all know this, what do you mean? You don't need a verse for that. Since Yibum is saying, what's the whole thing? We've been learning this all since we started Yevamot. Yibum is the one case where Eshet Ach is overridden because your brother has no children. We're going to allow you to marry his wife, which seems to imply, right? So therefore, let me read it inside. Right. Since the pasuk said, Ein labanim muteret, when he doesn't have children, she's permitted. Ha yesh labanim asura. It would assume that if your brother and his wife had children during his lifetime, that would mean, right, even if the brother had, you are forbidden forever to his wife. That's implied from Yibum. Okay, so you don't need a pasuk to teach us that. So now they're going to tell you three reasons why, even if we had that Yibum is permitted only if he doesn't have children, you still might have thought that it's permitted to marry his wife after he died even if he has no children? Why would we have assumed, even if he has children? In other words, if he doesn't have children and he dies, Yibum. But maybe, even with Yibum, maybe you wouldn't infer that it's forbidden to marry her if he died with children. Okay, maybe not. Why? And then we're going to say, that's why then we would need our verse to do it, which means our verse wouldn't be free to teach you Be'emina Av, Be'emina Em, right? That it's even from the mother. So let's go through our 3 reasons why, even though Yibum exists and it tells you when he dies without children, you can marry his wife, it doesn't necessarily mean you can't marry his wife if he died with children. So why is that? Dilma ein labanim asura la'alma v'sharya la'yabam. Yesh labanim sharya la'alma v'sharya la'yabam. Yibum maybe isn't telling you can't marry her if they had children. Yibum is telling you that if he died with children, what's the situation? He can marry anyone and even her maybe, even though this isn't the case, but you might have thought. What's Yibum coming to teach you? She can't marry just anyone. She can only marry you, right? Or you can do chalitza, but it's only you, nobody else right now. Because remember, she can't be chutza li'ish zal. She can't go marry anybody else. So that's what it may be coming to teach. Not that you can't marry her if she doesn't have, if he had kids. It's that you have to marry her, right? She can't marry anybody else when there's Yibum. And that's the focus of it. Inami, alternatively, you could say, ein labanim mitzvah, yesh labanim reshut. Yibum is saying there's a mitzvah to marry her. If not, maybe it's just permitted. You can if you want. It's optional. You don't have to, but you can. And that's the difference. This is optional. This track without children, it's obligatory or a mitzvah. So now, inami, a third option. Ein labanim in, yesh labanim lo, v'lav haba michlal aseh, aseh. According to the third explanation, you really can learn from Yibum that she can't marry him, but, right, if they have kids. But that's not a negative prohibition. It's not forbidden by a negative prohibition to marry her. It's just that you would derive it from a positive commandment. Sometimes we have alav haba michlal aseh. That means if the Torah says you can do something and it implies, but you can't do it like this, right? You can marry her if he died childless, but you can't marry her if he died with children. That it never says you cannot marry her if he died without children. So then comes our verse, Ervat achicha gila, to say it's a negative prohibition, because otherwise it would just be not doing a positive, not fulfilling a positive mitzvah, right? It's a negative commandment that's derived from positive mitzvah. That doesn't have the same status as a negative commandment. A negative commandment, right? Well, we've talked about this before. There's hierarchy, right? Today, right? We talked about it in our section. There's chayve mito beitin and kritut, right? Which are maybe, we don't know really which is on a higher level. Then we have chayve lavim, and then we have things that are come lav haba michal aseh, which has the status of an aseh. Basically means not doing a positive mitzvah. So then we would need our verse to teach you no. So we have 3 possibilities as to why we would still need our verse to teach you it's forbidden for him to marry the woman when he dies childless. When he dies with children, which would then mean that our verse isn't free to teach you Be'emina Av, Be'emina Em. And then that would be only through the prism of Yibum, which is only through the father's side. So they say, oh no, Katzav Kra'achrina. There's another verse. Ervat achiv gila. Okay, this is in Vayikra Kaf. Okay, the pasuk we were darshaning was in chapter 18. In chapter 20, it says, Isha sheyikachat eshet achiv nidahi, ervat achiv gila, aririm yihiyu. Soon we're going to get to this aririm yihiyu, which means they'll be childless. But it says, ervat achiv gila. He revealed the erva of his brother. That's unnecessary in the verse. He already said, don't take your brother's wife, nidahi. So why are you going to say now, right? The nidahi we already darshan. Why are you going to say ervat achiv gila? That's to teach you even when he's dead, if he had children, it's forbidden. So now our verse is free, and therefore we're going to learn it from our verse, right? Ervat achicha, he is going to teach you, even if they're brothers through the mother, you can't marry her. So now, right, if he divorces her, or even if he died with children. Now they say, ve'ema eshet ach, and the truth is if he died without children, also, because there's no yibum in that case. So even if he died without children, you still can't marry if it's your brother's wife and it was your brother through your mother. You only share the same mother. So Ema, why don't we say then, now I said we were going to get to this question. Once we say the Eshet Achiv is both, and then we have Yibum, which overrides that. Why don't we say Yibum overrides Be'emina Av, Be'emina Em, right? The Yibum kicks in even if you share the same mother. Right? Once you say they're the same, let's say they're the same all the way. Is permitted after he dies childless. Should be permitted after he dies childless. So Amar Kra, he Bahavayatate. First of all, we already learned that it all depends on Nachala and other reasons, right, which only apply to the right with Yerusha, with the brothers, but still they say here, he comes to teach you Bahavayatate. She stays connected to him, meaning you can't marry her if it's with the mother. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go through a whole bunch of other verses in these sections and darshan them. So, achoto de kata bakaret lamali. If you remember, we had this verse at the end of chapter 18, which says, all these people, anyone who does any of these despicable things will get karet. And then they said that clearly applies to the whole section. So when you look at the psukim about the sister, when it says the punishments, it says she gets karet. Now that seems strange. We already know she gets karet. There's no reason to mention. So achoto de kata bakaret lamali. What do we need it for? So they say l'chid Rabbi Yochanan. For Rabbi Yochanan, we're now going to see two different answers. Rabbi Yochanan is one. Rabbi Yitzchak has another. The Amar Rabbi Yochanan is going to sound like Masechet Shabbat. She'im asa'an kulam behe'elem echat chayav kol echat echat. Remember by Masechet Shabbat we learned if you do a bunch of melachot, you forgot it was Shabbat, okay, or you forgot the melachot were forbidden on Shabbat, or you forgot something you didn't remember, and you did all sorts of melachot, and then they tell you, hey, do you know today's Shabbat? Oh, I didn't realize, right? I was stuck on a desert island. I got lost track of days. I didn't realize today was Shabbat. Then you have to bring a separate korban sin offering on each malacha that you did. Likewise here, if you sleep with a various number of people who are forbidden relatives of yours, and then you find out, by the way, did you forget chapter 18 of Sefer Vayikra that all these things were forbidden to you? Obviously it wasn't a week like now where we just heard it in shul, right? Did you forget that? Well, if you forgot that, then, now we're going to tell you, okay, now I realize. So now I have to bring a separate sin offering for each thing that I did. Okay, each one is judged separately. That's what the karet of achoto comes to teach you. Ula Rabbi Yitzchak ta'amar kochayvei kritu bichlal ayu v'lama yatzat karet b'achoto l'dono b'koret v'lo b'malkot. So according to him, l'chalet minalam. We're saying a bunch of things in this sentence. First, we're saying according to Rabbi Yitzchak, he holds that the karet here is to teach you only get karet, you don't get lashes. Normally, when you get karet for something, you could also get lashes. When would you get lashes? Well, if someone tells you when you're about to do the action, do you know that if you do this, you will get lashes for doing it? And you say, I don't care, and you do it anyway, you will get lashes, but not for achoto. Achoto, it says karet to teach you just karet, not lashes. So now, according to Rabbi Yitzchak, who holds this, the question is, l'chalet minalam, where does he learn chiluk melachot, that you're going to have to bring a separate sin offering on each one? When it talks about Elisha b'nidat tumata lo tikrav l'galot ervata, then you're going to get karet there, it says. So Isha, they say from there, Isha, each, which really could have said El Nidat, right? A woman who's a nida, you could just call her a nida. You don't need the word woman, because obviously you're talking about a woman. So that teaches you each woman that you sleep with, and obviously for a woman, it would be every man you sleep with, you're going to be liable for a separate sin offering. Next, drasha. Dodato, dichtav barachmana aririm yihiyu. There's actually a mistake. It should be aririm yamutu. We're going to now say by the pasuk we saw before with the isha sheikachet eshet achiv, the brother's wife. It said at the end of the verse aririm yihiyu, and at the end of the verse of dodato, the aunt, it says aririm yamutu. So you have to just switch the text. Our text is just a mistake. It should have said aririm yamutu. Lamali. So what do you need that verse for? Why is it telling you that? You will die childless. As Rabba said, the Rabba Rami, he brought a contradiction between two verses. K'tiv aririm yiyu, uktiv aririm yamutu. Right, so that's what I just said. In one of them, it says you will be childless, and the other it says you will die childless. Ha-ketzad, how could that be? Well, yesh labanim kovran. If you had children, you will bury them; they will die before you. Ein labanim holei hariri. Now, obviously, we don't really know how God's going to punish, but the Torah tells us this is the punishment, right? Whether or not this happens or not is a whole separate question because it doesn't always happen. But that's the way they're describing karet here. Aririm, so ein lo banim holei hariri. If you didn't have children before you sinned, you will not have children. Okay, that's how we understand aririm yihiyu and aririm yamutu. So why do you need them both? You would think means maybe it means you will be, meaning you have been childless, but maybe after that you won't be. Which means no, you will die childless, meaning you will not have any children from here on in. If it says you might think that means from now that I sinned until then, I will not have children, or if I do, they will die. But anyone who was born before my sin maybe is going to be spared. No, you will die childless, no children, right, from before at all. Okay, I'm sorry, that's why you have to say no, from before and until you're dead. So what they're trying to say is it will be a complete childless fate for you. That will be your sin. And that's why both come. Now we have to backtrack. We got sidetracked by all sorts of things, but really our question we started with on yesterday's daf was hara'ah. When it comes to chayve krichut, how do we know that that's forbidden? Which is the initial act of intercourse, which we don't yet know exactly what that is. It's going to be a whole debate about that at the end of the daf. So hara'ah de chayve lavim minam. How do we know that when it comes to chayve lavim, okay, all the forbidden relations that are lo taseh, like a mamzer and a Yisrael can't get married. What if they have intercourse and it's only hara'ah, they don't actually finish? So how do you know you're going to be liable? So they say, okay, what is shivcha charufa? It was also in Parshat Kedoshim that we read in Israel yesterday, which is if you have a woman who is designated to an Evet Ivri, what it is shivcha Knani is allowed to marry or be connected with an Evet Ivri when he's in slavery. This is someone who's sold in slavery because he can't afford something, a Jewish person. He can be with the shivcha Knani. When he leaves without her and without the children. But while he's the servant, he can. So if there's two options of what a shivcha charufa is. I'll try to do this very simply because we don't have a lot of time. But one is that either he's designated to her, right? Like it was specific. It wasn't like, oh, sleep with anyone, but she was designated to him specifically. And then someone else comes and sleeps with her. Or maybe she's a status of a half slave, half free person. And it's because her half free side is Jewish. And therefore she's Eshadish. Because remember, we said there's no Eshadish by a shivcha or a shivcha knanit or an evet, or a non-Jewish woman. But so again, according to the second interpretation, well, she has a free side of her, which is Jewish, because one master freed her, the other one didn't, so she's partly free. So that's because of that you're liable. Some people say no, because it's true, she's generally not an Eshadish, but if she's designated to an Evet Ivri, that makes her kind of like an Eshadish. Okay, so either which way, it says there's shivchat zera. Why shivchat zera? Right, you're not allowed to be with this woman in any case. You have to bring an asham, shivcha charufa, and whatever. So anyway, michlal dechayve lavim bahara'ah. This comes to teach you only by the shivcha charufa, which is a lo taseh, a negative commandment, is ha'ara not enough. You need shivchat zera. Shivchat zera means, right, that one that with seed that you could actually have children, whereas you finished the act. Whereas if you only did ha'ara, you wouldn't be chayav, but that comes to say just in this case, not in any other case. All other things that are like this, chayve lavim, you would be liable even for ha'ara. So then they say, you could say the opposite. You could say, no, by chayve kritut, it said ha'ara is liable, which means only when it's something very serious. Otherwise, when it's lighter, like just a regular negative commandment, maybe you wouldn't be. So you have logic going both ways, like kind of like we started off today's daf, right? You can prove it this way, you can prove it that way. So I'm Rav Ashi, in Ken, Lishtokrami, Shivcha Charufa. If you want to say that, then the pasuk didn't need to say anything by Shivcha Charufa, and it would have been obvious that only Big Marbia. The fact that they had to say something means really all other chayve lavim, ha'ara'at, you're chayev, even the beginning of sexual act, whereas specifically by Shivcha Charufa, it's the one exception to the rule. So we're fine with that. Now we want to know, we're going to distinguish between chayve lavim and chayve lavim of a kohen. There's a grusha, right? All these women who can't marry a divorcee, a chalutza, all these women who can't marry a kohen. Hara'ad chayve lavim de kahuna minalam. Where do we learn that by them, even if he has the beginning of intercourse with them, he'll be liable and she'll be liable? Kicha, because it uses the same language, and we're going to have a lot of these gzera shavas now. Ki kach, right? Isha zona v'chalala lo yikachu. Okay, there. This is the beginning of Emor, our next parsha. Isha zona v'chalala lo yikachu. Okay, Isha grusha mi Isha lo yikachu. It says likicha, and it also says likicha by Isha Sheyikachad Achoto. We talked about, right, the sister, and from there we can learn that whatever's true for there is true for here. So therefore, it's going to be just like the Chayve Kritut, and you're going to, even Hara, you're going to be liable for. Chayve Ase Minan. I already told you this is category of not fulfilling a mitzvah Ase. How do we know that? What's the major case? The Edomi and the Mitzri, right? It says there, Dorsh Banim Asher Yivaldu Lahem Dorsh Lishi Yavo Lahem B'Kal Hashem. The third generation of Egyptians and Edomites can marry. That means you can't marry first or second. But it never says you can't marry first or second. So because of that, right, it's going to be forbidden. How do we know their ha'ara is going to be liable? You're going to be liable also. Atya bi'a bi'a, because it says lo yavo mamzer, and it says yavo. The same language is used there as Shavah, since we already learned it by mamzer. Chayve lavim ha'ara yochayev. Also here, you're going to be liable as well. What about Yevamot l'shuk minalam? What about the lo taseh, that she can't marry an ish zar? If you have a Yevamot, she can't just marry anyone, so she does yibum. So they say that's a ridiculous question, because there's a machloket, whether it's a lav or whether it's an aseh, but either which way, we just said you're going to be liable for. So ilaman damar lav, it's a lav. And ilaman damar aseh, it's an aseh. In other words, whatever way you categorize it, it's going to be, for hara is going to be already liable, because either it's in this category or that category. In both those categories, we just said hara, you're going to be liable for. So therefore, they change the question and they say, Ela yivamali yabam minala. Now we're moving. That was all negative. We talked about karet, lav of kohanim, and aseh. What about fulfilling a mitzvah? Can you fulfill a mitzvah through ha'ara? For example, yibum. What if they just did, remember, yivama yavo aleh, that's how you fulfill yibum. What if it was only ha'ara and they didn't finish the act? Yivamali yabam minala, atya bi'a bi'a. Says Yevamot yavo aleha, and it said lo yavo mamzer b'Kal Hashem, same language, right? Yavo bi'ah. So from there you learn that even yibum can be fulfilled by ha'ara alone. Yishala ba'ala minayin, a woman to her husband. How do we know? Now, most people think this means kiddushin, because kiddushin you can do by bi'ah. So where do we learn this from? Ate kicha kicha, because it says ki kach ishisha, and it says kicha also ish ki kachet achoto. So the same language is used. From there we learn ha'ara is enough. Tosfot and other Rishonim say, what are you talking about? It says in Kiddushin that ha'ara is not enough for Kiddushin. Okay, Masechet Kiddushin, it says it. So how do we resolve that? That's on Kiddushin Daf Yud. So some people explain that this is actually talking about the marriage and not the Kiddushin. I just want to talk about Kiddushin Bibiyah for 1 second, which is a very strange thing, because what happens is in Kiddushin, originally a woman, right, is kind of permitted to everybody, theoretically, right? Anyone can marry her. Then once she does Kiddushin, she's now forbidden to everybody. She's uniquely designated to this man, but they can't actually be together in sexual relations at that point. She's still forbidden to him. We say that in the Berkata Erusin under the Chuppah, Asher Asara Ta'arusot Lanu, right? And then they become permitted at Nisuin. But there's something strange there, because they can actually do the act of Kiddushin through sexual relations, even though it becomes forbidden to them a minute later, right? When they're finished, she's actually forbidden to him. Which is, you can see why the rabbis discourage Kiddushin B'Biyah, because it's a little bit weird. Now they're going to have relations, and then next day they're not allowed to, right? And then it was often a year between Erusin and marriage. So that's why the rabbis discourage this. But that's really what happens, okay, just so you're aware. But then also the marriage is consummated. That's why we do yichud, to give you enough time that theoretically you could, right, when you go into a room for, I think it's 9 minutes or something, right? It's theoretically a minimum amount of time that you could theoretically do bi'ah, right? That's part of consummating the marriage through bi'ah. So maybe that's what the sugya is referring to. There's a bit of a debate, okay, because of the sugya in Kiddushin that seems to contradict. Amarav. Now we go back to this shifcha charufa where it said shichat zera, which we already explained. Now we're going to say shichat zera appears in 2 more places, and why. In these 3 places, it says shichat zera, right? If we already said ha'ara, you're normally responsible for, and ha'ara doesn't include shichat zera, so why are we going to say it in these other places? What is it coming to teach? So shichat zera, shifcha charufa kidamra. We already explained why. To teach you, just this is unique. All other chayvei lavim you need, right? Even ha'ara is enough to make you liable. What's this for? Okay, here's where the graphic stuff starts coming, right? We start getting more graphic. If he has relations when he is not erect, okay? So basically, If that were to happen, then you wouldn't be liable for Eshet Ish, okay, if it's not functioning properly. But there's a machloket about this. Whether he has relations when his Evar is dead, does that mean, right? Some people think you're not liable. That would make sense. Then it's coming to exclude that, right? If there is no Zera. But what if the one opinion that says you're responsible, you're liable, how can you explain it? You can't say it's coming to exclude that case, you're liable anyway. So Ella, now here the dead is not referring to his body parts, it's actually his organ, it's referring to the woman actually being dead. Okay, now this is a little bit strange. Where he has relations with an Eshet Ish while she's dead. Okay, I'm not going to get into the details of why this would be and how, but anyway, that's what it's coming to exclude. Now, why would you even think that he'd be liable if she's dead? Well, remember we said that even when she dies, he still can't marry a bunch of her relatives and she can't, right? After death, this relationship is still considered, it was his wife. So maybe you would think she's still an Eshet Ish at that point. Kamash Malan, that's what it's coming to exclude. No, she's not. For the purposes of being liable for having a relationship with a married woman, she's dead. It's not relevant. Sota lamali. What about a sota? Why is it Sheshach Batzera? Look at Tanya. Okay, if you think it's uncomfortable to talk about these things, maybe the rabbis were, and that's why they said the following: Shech Batzera prat ledavar acher, excluding something else. Okay, often they say something else because they don't want to say what it is. Well, it leaves us puzzled. What is this something else? What is it excluding? My davar acher. Amar Shesha prat l'shekinela shelo kedarka. What's the whole thing of a sota? The husband suspects his wife of being with another man. So maybe he suspected not that she had normal sexual relations with him, but anal intercourse with him. And that's the shelo kedarka. He was kinela shelo kedarka. Maybe that wouldn't be a sota. So Amalei Rava, Mishkavei Ishaktiv. It says, no, this is actually the pasuk about Mishkav Zachol. But anyway, it says Mishkavei Isha. They learn from here there's multiple ways, meaning even shelo kedarka, it's going to be part of the sota situation, right? Any kind of part of forbidden relations is shelo kedarka. So it can't be that. Ela Amarava, Prada Shekinela Derech Evarim. Let's say he was worried that she went into a room alone with a man and they slept together naked, or they had some physical interaction, but it wasn't actually having intercourse. So if that's the case, she's not a sota. That's not, you don't go through the whole sota process if that was his suspicion. So I'm like, Abaye, Pritzuta asa Rachmana? Nobody would think that was what the Torah was forbidding. In other words, you don't need a pasuk to tell us that's not a sota case. Everybody knows if it's not intercourse, well, we're not worried about it. Okay, it's going to get progressively more graphic here. So he thought that nishika doesn't mean kissing. It means literally kissing, but it means that his body part touched her body part without going inside. Okay, so it's like a nishika, like a kiss. So hani chalamanda amar. Now, this only works if you say hara'a zo hachnasat tara. That hara'a, which we've already said is forbidden, is actually going somewhat inside. Where it's just touching my ikalamemer. So how do you explain that then? If you say hara'az nishika, then that's forbidden, and then it would be a sota. So we go back to something we rejected. It is that he thought they were just touching each other, but not going any farther. You might have thought that the Torah gave this case of the sota for any time the husband is jealous of his wife doing something with another man. And it's coming to tell you, no, that is not the case. Okay? We are not going to let you do a sota just because you're worried that they were having physical contact with each other. Okay, now we're going to end with this big machloket that we made reference to. Now we're going to see it inside, and we're going to see multiple different opinions about what Rabbi Yochanan actually held on this topic. Maybe I was thinking to myself, maybe he wasn't so clear and explicit about it. And maybe because of that, there were all different interpretations of what actually he held. Amar Shmuel, ha'ara'ah zo nishika. So Shmuel holds it's nishika. That's already ha'ara'ah. You're liable, mida oraita, for this. Mashal adam sheminechet ba'ol piv efshar shelo yidchal kabasal. Okay, this is where we get even more graphic, right? It's like putting a finger by your mouth. There's no way it wouldn't go inside a little bit. So that's why nishika is forbidden. We said the shifcha charufa is only chayiv shechvat zera. What does he say? That's achnasat tara, which some people thought that's what ha'ara'ah was. But ha'ara'ah, we already said you're not liable for shifcha charufa. So that must mean he holds nishika, right? An earlier stage. His ha'ara'ah, achnasat tara, that he once you go inside, he assumes that means that's like gemar bi'ah. We're going to treat it as full intercourse. Mativ Rav Sheshet, he brings a contradiction. Shichvat zera eino chayav ela al biat hamirok. Biat hamirok seems to be having full penetration. So my lav meruk hagid, lo meruk atara. They say no, that doesn't mean going in fully. That means just putting in the tip inside, and that would then match what he said. Ki'ata Rav Dimi ar Rabbi Yochanan. Now we have a different opinion because that one seemed to say hachnasat atara was already gemar bi'ah, fully. But now Rav Dimi said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, ha'ara'ah zo hachnasat atara. That's only ha'ara'ah, not gemar bi'ah, not finishing the act. So Amrle, Rabbi Bar Chana lo Amar Hachi, they said, but that's not what Rabbi Bar Chana said, Rabbi Yochanan said. So he says the funny line, oh, iu shakai, oh, ana shakai. One of us is lying, okay? Because I think this and he thinks that, and clearly one of us is lying. Ki'ata Ravin Amar Rabbi Yochanan. I told you we're going to have a lot of variations of what Rabbi Yochanan said. Ha'ara'ah zo achnasat atara. Okay, he says it explicitly, that is hara'ah. So, Adarabba Bar Chana vadai palik. He clearly disagrees with Rabbi Bar Chana because Rabbi Bar Chana clearly said, Hachnasat atara, you're obligated in shivcha charufa. That means shichvat zera. That means in its entirety. But the question is, Adishmuel milema palik. Shmuel said ha'araz nishika. The question is, did Shmuel say nishika is you're liable already for nishika, but even more you'd be liable as well? It would be hara'ah. And remember, there's 3 stages: nishika, achnasat atara, and gemar bi'ah. But shivcha charufa, theoretically, Rabbi Shmuel could obligate you only if there was really gemar bi'ah, not meaning he could say it's a range. That hara'ah is a range from nishika to achnasat atara. So they're saying, look, really, in fact, we could assume he's not arguing with Shmuel because minishika va'ad achnasat atara hara'ah karili. You could say that he has a range. Ki'ata Shmuel bar Yehuda, Rabbi Shmuel bar Yehuda Amar Rabbi Yochanan, 4th version, hara'ah zo achnasat atara. So that's, by the way, the same as the 3rd. Gemar bi'ah mamash. And then he says, gemar bi'ah really means full intercourse. Mikan va'elach eno ela nishika upator leha. Any less than that is only like nishika, and you're exempt from it. Now, upaligat Shmuel. That clearly disagrees. In other words, anything less than achnasat atara, he says is not hara, and that clearly disagrees with Shmuel because Shmuel said nishika is hara, and you'd be liable. This version of Rabbi Yochanan clearly disagrees with that. Okay, with that, we will finish for today our kind of daf that's a little bit out there, and we will move on to, I didn't look forward yet to see how far, if we're continuing with these topics or not, but we will see in tomorrow's daf. Chodesh Tov to everyone, and Shavua Tov.